Hi, Nine. We're going to look at the advantages and disadvantages of genetic engineering, particularly screening embryos, and then we're going to move on to look at other things. So it's quite of a thought lesson today. Now, I would normally do a clip about this film. So this film is called Gattaca, and it was about how you could choose and manipulate genes of offspring to create a sort of defined race, if you like, by getting rid of poor genetics and enhancing them. But it became a sort of rich man's game to select the genetics of their children and that kind of thing. So the idea of designer babies. So worth a watch. So there's no clip to watch here, but it's an interesting film to watch if you are bored. So we're going to talk about embryology. So what do we think an embryology is? So ology is kind of a study or a science, and embryo is a group of cells that come from the zygote and then it multiplies via mitosis. And so embryology is the study of embryos, or the study of organisms before they've differentiated, otherwise used as stem cells. So genetic engineering, we know, means lots of different things. That's annoying timing, sorry. So it can mean changing the human genetic makeup or of an organism to make it more resistant to pesticides or things like that. But one thing that we do, or you can do if you pay for it, is that you can screen embryos, particularly if they are going to be inserted in IVF. So we screen embryos. We can screen them for genetically inherited diseases so they don't get passed on. So there's a 3-day-old embryo, so it's only like a bunch of cells, so the zygote will divide. So embryo screening is one thing that we can look at, where we can look at genetically inherited diseases, and then we can actually select or test the certain embryos that we're going to use. So that's kind of like the beginning of sort of designer babies. And I know that I'm pretty sure, I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure John Legend and his wife actually chose a female embryo because they were screened and they chose that. And is it okay to start having people choose the gender of their children? Maybe, maybe not. So let's have a look. So here's a case study. So Sarah has found out that she's got Huntington's disease. So that is a disease of the nervous system. It's debilitating. It means you have a lower life expectancy, and it's a dominant trait, so you will pass that on. Her and her husband want to start the family. She's Christian but doesn't want to pass her disease on, because if she passes on just one of her Huntington's genes, then that is you can't be a carrier of Huntington's. You either have it or you don't. So she can have her embryos checked. The ones with the disease will be destroyed. So Sarah is now 35 and has started to develop symptoms. So what should she do? So this is quite an ethical situation. So have a little think about that. Have a little think. Is it right to screen for an incurable genetic disease that doesn't show itself to middle age, like Huntington's disease? Is it right to end the life of an embryo because it is living but it can't sustain life by itself? Is that the right thing to do? So you might want to start thinking about advantages and disadvantages. Now, I'm only focused on embryo screening here, really, but we'll talk about fruit and veg that we get genetically modified again. So obviously there's quite a lot of religious arguments that can come into this, and moral and ethical issues. You might want to list the reasons for genetic screening and the reasons that could be used against it. Give your own opinion. There's no right or wrong. These are your thoughts. But if you've got reasons to back up your thoughts, justify what you think. So you might be somewhere in the middle of, I don't know if it's right or wrong. I don't know if it's totally right, totally wrong. Obviously, you can't stick this on the board, but it's worth thinking about, where do you sit? Now, it is not an issue if your opinion changes as facts present themselves. So assessing your opinions regularly is so important, and it's important to change your opinions if it suits, because that's what learning is. So some people might grow up thinking one thing and that's their opinion, and as they learn and from experience, that will change. So as long as you're constantly evaluating your opinion to see if it still is suitable, then that's okay. So let's have a look at the Christian opinion generally. They're generally against it. They believe that life is created in the image of God and everyone, is entitled to life. They believe it encourages people who are not perfect to be destroyed before they're born. Christians also believe every person has a right to life. However, some Christians believe that God gave us the gift of science, therefore they are his will. So interesting, when we come to probably different denominations of Christianity will show different views. Islamic View allows genetic engineering. They believe that Allah has given them these gifts and they should be used, but again, at different denominations. Many Muslims believe that embryo at the early stages isn't viable life because it can't be sustained outside the body, etc. And so Christians and Muslims will differ upon this opinion. But again, it depends on the denomination of Christian and also your own personal experiences and views. So, does having a disability in life make you less important? Is it better to destroy embryos which aren't perfect? Is it better because you'll save society money on NHS? Does the idea of genetic engineering value humans for the wrong reasons? Is discarding an embryo based on an imperfection immoral? Is it better to live than not live at all, no matter what? This is and always is a sort of separating debate in classrooms, and it doesn't mean that there is a right answer because this is very much subjective. It's about on what you believe because the science is there, but you have to decide whether you think that that is right or wrong. So this is really a short lesson because it's one where you have to think about it. And we test in the UK pregnant women for Down syndrome. We test for all sorts of other diseases. Is then selecting embryos for that purpose better or worse? Obviously, it's only people that can afford to do this. So it's a really interesting, divisive debate. Obviously, we can't do this, so ignore that. Stephen Hawking, who died quite recently, actually, was it recently? I don't know. What year is it? Unsure. How do you feel about having ALS, which is motor neurone disease? And obviously his has been very debilitating, and it was sort of predicted that he would die a lot younger than he did. And he is one of the most brilliant minds of the last century. And I mean, if his embryos were screened, would that mean that we wouldn't have Stephen Hawking's take on the universe? So, disabilities or imperfections of embryos doesn't mean that, that can lead to wonderful, wonderful things. Okay, so I realised to start half them with okay, so this is just some other examples of why people might choose embryos. So selecting whether to have a boy or a girl. Like I said, I think Chrissy Teigen and John Legend did that. Choose to have a girl because a boy is more likely to have haemophilia. So that's a genetic condition that tends to be inherited by boys. Choose to have a girl because boys are more likely to be colourblind. They could choose to have a gene adapted to improve intelligence. They could select the eye colour of their baby. Choose to have a boy because the baby's bone marrow could be used to save a two-year-old brother. And I believe there's a film about that, which I kind of refuse to watch because it sounds heartbreaking. So these are other things that we could be screening for or genetically engineering. GM foods as well. Tomato is probably the most common, but quite often grains are genetically modified to make them more resistant to herbicides or to make them sort of repellent to other to insects and things like that. Got some vines there, and we've got Piggy there. So should we be genetically modifying meat? Do we know the effect that's going to have on the food chain? So many questions. You might want to think about what you believe, what you think, what you feel when you do that, when you start doing your befores and after your 6-mark question, which is coming up. And consider the opposite argument all the time. What do you think someone is going to oppose on your so this is your extension question. Genetic engineering is always wrong. Do you agree? So this is 6 marks. Come up with more than one point of view and give examples. So, for example, for 2 marks straight out the gate, I'd say genetic engineering is not always wrong because millions of people have been saved by genetically modifying bacteria to produce insulin, which means that many people have survived. And also we're reducing cruelty to animals when we are providing insulin. So That's quite a good one to start off with. And then I will probably go into how it is bad to have designer babies from a moral point of view, religious point of view, and ethical point of view. We're not doing the volunteers one. I'm going to link this. So this is, again, whether you think it's an advantage or disadvantage. So the process of genetic engineering involves splicing an area of you will need to probably just write out the words in order, I suppose, of the gaps, unless you want to write out the whole thing. But that's going to be linked to this. So it is a very short one today, but it's more of a thought process. You might want to go onto websites, Google it, and have a look and actually think about what you think about genetic engineering and genetic modification.